Now let's introduce you and we will flow with it. We have a plan.
Looking forward.
So. Well, a warm welcome, everyone. My name is Anna Bjurstam. I am the wellness pioneer of Six Senses, and I'm sitting here in the beautiful Stockholm Archipelago at Waxholm Hotel. I've borrowed a room to do this very special Friends of Six Senses that we're doing today. And it's special for a lot of reasons. First of all, we're three of us, and I'm going to introduce both our guests in just a second. And it's also a great honor to have Jimmy Nelson here, who is a child of the 60s, born in the UK, but he grew up in Africa, Asia, and South America. And he was schooled by the Jesuits and residing today in Amsterdam. And tonight's guest of Friends of Six Senses is known in part for his amazing photography of indigenous people and cultures, yet simply put is an extraordinary artist, an investigator of life, a fearless individual, which we love, who has experienced deeply both the light and the dark that has formed who he is today. And tonight I'm tag teaming with my friend and our CEO, Neil Jacobs. And Neil Jacobs has been the CEO of Six Senses for the past 8 years. Before then, he also ran Baccarat and One Hotels, and even before then was 15 years with Four Seasons. So he's one of the most seasoned hoteliers out there in the world today. So we're both delighted to introduce the unique and fascinating Jimmy Nelson. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Anna. Jimmy, apart from anything, it's just really good to see you again. And for everyone, you know, Jimmy is a great friend of Six Senses, and worked with us does work with us in Ibiza and helped us out with our big marketing conference we had in Portugal a while ago. So we consider him a great friend of our organization. And Jimmy and I met for the first time when he was speaking at the TED conference in Rio in 2014. And that was soon after the release of his first major book before they passed away. Jimmy, I was struck by your passion, your openness, your apparent vulnerability and view of the world, and knew immediately you were certainly someone that I wanted to spend time with. In one of your books, you quote an Australian Aboriginal saying, "We are all visitors to this time, this place. We're just passing through. Our purpose here is to learn, to grow, to love, and then we return home." So I wanted to start with that because I know that early on in your career, you were working in a number of war zones, and then you took a very, very long trip into the Himalayas. How did that broader journey start, and what took you down that path of discovery that you chose?
First of all, thank you both for the introduction. Welcome here to sunny Amsterdam. My home has been for the last 26 years now. I think weirdly, for the first time in the last 26 years, I'm beginning to appreciate it. I'm talking about writing, and that quote is a very, very beautiful quote, although it's not my quote. I'm writing something in a new book, which we're about to publish in the autumn. And I've decided that the first ever real love of my life is, strangely, Amsterdam. But it's taken me 26 years to understand that. And then perhaps 52 years, which is the age I am today, to better understand the journey that I'm on. I think it'll be never ending, as for all of us. I've only really begun to recently, perhaps in the last few months, as we've all had time to contemplate, put it all into perspective. It has, in all honesty, very little to do with photography, a camera, a lens. That's only one of nowadays a variety of mediums I use to fulfill a sort of perpetual curiosity of discovery. Discovery of, I think ultimately, and this is where you're talking about directness and vulnerability, myself, but using the world and the other in the world as a mirror. I think that's essentially the journey. And you mentioned at the very beginning, I grew up in the developing world. My father was a very weird, strange, meant very well, found very difficult to communicate, autistic geophysicist He was so autistic, he preferred living with husky dogs. He spent 8 years living in the Antarctic, working for the British National Antarctic Survey between the ages of 20 and 28. Then had me by default, I think because he was just trying to perform a role in society. And off he took me and my sister around the developing world as a geologist. He never managed to hold us. He never managed to say that he loved us. He's now dead, unfortunately. But what he did introduce us both to, and especially me, was to the world. And weirdly, he couldn't communicate, although he learned to speak about 15 different languages. But he often talked about trying to discover the layers of Mother Earth and trying to connect with its depth. And I'm not a scientist. I haven't studied since the age of 17. But I think perhaps I'm doing the same, inspired by him, but in a very different way. And it was sort of, the journey became sort of richer, and I always want to use this in a positive context. After, weirdly, the age of 7, between the ages of 0 and 7, every year we went to a different destination. South America, Africa, Southeast Asia. And at the age of 7, I went to a Catholic Jesuit boarding school in the UK. And that's kind of where the real journey of discovery started, or it was sort of imposed upon me by these very unusual priests. I arrived pure, open, vulnerable, young, into this sort of what turned out to be sort of, wasn't a seminary, but it was about 400 priests, 1,000 kids, miles away from anywhere, up in the hills of the northern UK. And I arrived vulnerable. And as a result of that, the priests sort of were the catalyst for a different journey, a journey of self-discovery. They sort of basically, without going into too much, it broke me down to bare nothing, the best way you can put it. And from there on, you had to rebuild. I disconnected with myself. I disconnected with anything to do with feelings and emotion. And I think weirdly, at the ages of 16, and if you also put that into context to what I'm doing now, it's about rituals and transitions and traditions. That when I was leaving childhood and becoming a man at the age of 16 and growing hair, entering puberty, having all these, inverted commas, sort of feelings of sexuality, I loathed it. I loathed my whole physical being, my whole state. And the icing on the cake for that journey was that all my hair fell out in one night as a combination of cerebral malaria, which I'd got in West Africa, overdose of antibiotics, and stress. I think ultimately stress. I remember waking up one morning, looking in the mirror at the very tender age of 16, already not liking myself very much, and meeting what felt like a little bit like an alien. You know, all facial hair had disappeared. And I stared at this new face in a mirror. And although, relatively speaking, nowadays at the age of 52, it's actually quite handy with the lifestyle that I lead, not having any hair. But at the age of 16, it was a disaster, absolute disaster. And I thought, this is so unfair.
Back?
Huh?
You always.
No, I've got nothing. I've got nothing. I can swim like 1,000,000 miles an hour. So I'm very aerodynamic. And it was all these events led me to this moment of jumping. And I think, you know, to narrow the story down, I jumped into the world. I had to rediscover who I was, or I didn't actually really want to live, to be honest. And as a child, the beginning of this journey was I had my avatar. And my avatar was, although there weren't any computers then in the 70s, it was Tintin. In Holland, we call him Kuifje. And I had piles and piles of Tintin. And I lived under my covers with my little torch, hoping that the priests weren't going to come and get me. And I disappeared into his world. And one of the journeys that he went on, which is the journey I thought I would try and reenact with my new appearance of having no hair, was to go to meet the monks in Tibet. So at the age of 16 and a half, I finished my high school, 17, and I disappeared. I didn't tell anybody. I wanted to punish everybody around me for having abandoned me. It was very unkind, to be honest, as I've now see my children go through puberty, and if they'd done that to me, it wouldn't have just been my hair that had fallen out. And I disappeared, in 1985 to Tibet, where I lived and traveled the length of for a period of 2 years.
Wow. And I mean, you've often, you know, conversations we've had before, and, you know, going back to the bush and schooling and things, I mean, you've often talked about, you know, painful places, if I can even touch on that, that help make you stronger and continue with the purpose that you've had. I mean, those experiences clearly have formed you in the way you are, you know, and the dark and the light. I mean, it's interesting to me how, you know, I know you're not talking about photography, but you're an amazing photographer, but it's that dark and light that comes through what you've lived through, you know.
It's an absolute obsession, a life necessity. It's the source of everything that I stand for, that I have to feel the light, and it's manic, and I can appreciate that. And the only way I can do it, and I have to do that on a daily basis, I have a ritual. And again, it's all about rituals. I never, ever, ever get up after sunrise. And it doesn't matter where I am or what time zone I'm in. In Amsterdam here at the moment, the sun's beginning to come up at about 4:45. So I'm not sleeping a lot. And I live quite high in an apartment. And I greet the dawn to respect every single day, to acknowledge every single day, to be thankful to being here today, relatively healthy, in the middle of this journey. Relatively sane, having had the most extraordinary opportunities presented to me by this search of reconnection, of when everything was broken down. I mean, if you look at society nowadays, I was reading something earlier where they said there's climate breakdown, COVID lockdown, and financial meltdown. Well, in a way, that can be beautiful. Much the same if you mirror that to what happened to me as a kid. Because of being so far in that corner where there's nowhere else to turn, you've got to reinvent yourself, and you've got to connect with a different value, a different standard, a different way of living. And that's what I organically have evolved into for myself.
So let me ask you a question, because and I just also want to say that you would maybe have a bit of a problem to live in Sweden, where I'm at, because sunrise is about 3 a.m. right now, and sunset is about maybe 1 a.m. So that could be a bit of an issue. But going further, I was just thinking about what you talked about before, and I just wanted to check here is that I believe that there's a lot of youth out there today, and there's mothers and fathers who see their children who are actually hating their bodies, hating their lives, hating the situation they're in. We're seeing that more and more for various reasons. I think reconnection is one. Now, how did you actually get out of that? How did you come into love?
I'm going to use a contemporary analogy and to bring it up to date now. I have 3 kids. The eldest is 23, a daughter, son of 20, and a daughter of 18. I've been, obviously with my journey, my travels, my rediscovery of self, there's an element, their upbringing hasn't been ideal for the last few years. I've tried to be the most amazing father, but I've failed in some areas. I'm now in Amsterdam. He's here. So I started to ask him to join me every morning in the park that we live next to. And I said, I need help. And he said, well, what do you need help with that? And I said, well, I'm getting older. I'm getting stiff. I need to stay healthy. Can you help me stretch? Yoga, Pilates, whatever you want to call it. And he was a little bit grumpy. And so every morning I've been getting them up very early, and this started at the beginning of lockdown. And we went into the local park, and at the beginning, quite a bit of animosity came out, stories of everything, all the repressed anger that he's had over the last few years. And I held on and I held on, week 1, week 2, week 3, and then we got into a rhythm, got into a ritual. Until only 2 mornings ago, we were there, a couple of months later, lying under the same tree we lie under every morning. He burst out into tears, and he held my hand. And he said, isn't this extraordinary? I never knew we had this park next to us. And I said, well, you've been living next to this park for the last 20 years. I said, but I didn't know how beautiful it was. I didn't appreciate how extraordinary. We've spent the last 3 months lying here every morning, stretching on our little mats, watching the park grow, watching the park flourish, watching the park thrive, looking up into the sky, seeing no airplanes, not smelling the petrol, which we do here in Amsterdam. And hasn't it been absolutely wonderful? And then I said to him, I said, well, in a weird way, this was my dream. I wanted to have a ritual with you. And I told him about the huli in Papua New Guinea. And I said, well, you know those pictures I've made of those extraordinary men who stand with yellow faces? I've got one here, 1 second. Here, this picture will help.
Yes.
They have a ritual, and their ritual is all this transition of becoming a child into an adult. And it's an incredible ritual. The children, teenagers, get taken by a shaman into the high altitude jungle for 1 year. And when they leave into the jungle, they leave with nothing, no clothes, no food, no protection, absolutely nothing, except for the shaman to guide them. And the objective of that year is to connect with the natural world, to find the resources that you need to survive, to eat, to be safe, to keep yourself clean. And they begin to get into that rhythm. They start finding sort of a way of sustainably living in the natural world. But then at the same time, and this is really when it gets magnificent, they have to grow their hair. They're Melanesian, so they have this afro. And they have to grow their hair into these fantastic shapes, like these pots. And the whole idea of that's almost impossible because you've got no house, no protection, it's very damp. And so you spend the whole day grooming each other, the whole day cleaning your hair. And then after a year, if you've grown your hair successfully into the shape, the shaman says you've succeeded. Imagine how you have to spend a year with these big pots on your head, sleeping on the floor of a jungle and not squashing it. So you have to really connect with the natural world in the most wonderful way. Anyway, a year later, they have these fantastic shapes of hair. The shaman says, you've completed, you go back to the village. When they get back to the village, they have this ceremony where they shave off this hair and make it into a hat, into a wig. And then he says, okay, that's part one of the ritual. Part two of the ritual is you've got to go back into the jungle now alone for another 6 months and decorate that hat, that wig with your authenticity, your individuality. So find what makes you who you are and combine that with the tribe and the tradition. Then they come back into the village, so 1.5 years now, have a ceremony and then paint their faces all yellow, as they do here. And if they're lucky enough to have me to come along to make a picture of them. And I was sort of explaining this to my son, and he again burst out into tears. And he said, I finally understand what you're doing, Dad. There's a little bit of a strange irony there when you start talking about growing hair and wigs and everything. I said, well, I'm not capable of doing that. But this deep, deep, deep wish to connect with self, the environment, and one another. And I thought it was beautiful that here we are, many miles away from Papua New Guinea, in a park, in a developed city here in Northern Europe, in Amsterdam. It is possible to have these wonderful moments of connecting with one another, connecting with oneself, and with what's left of the natural world that's around us. So this sort of unending being aware of all the journey that we're on, that it's never complete, it's never finite, you've never truly discovered it. You've got to keep reapplying it. And if it's not about making pictures, it's about being alive completely and being aware.
Yeah, I have to tell you, you don't know this, Jimmy, but actually Anna is our shaman, is our Six Senses shaman, and has been off in Chile kind of studying and doing all kinds of things. And I'm now just wondering when she's going to go off into the jungle for 6 months and do that hair thing. Any thoughts, Anna, on that would be good. Listen, Jimmy, I have to bring this up because I know you don't want to so much talk about the books, but you know, before they pass away, which to me was an extraordinary body of work, you know, and sitting on my table in the living room right now, however beautiful it was, it wasn't without its controversy around tribal people's rights and certain other things. I mean, what came out of that for you? And was that critique an influence in anything you did going forward, or how did that all feel?
It's a good question. It came as a massive surprise. There was quite a lot of it, as you're aware. You can still go online. In a way, it was magical in hindsight, because it was, again, one of life's big challenges. It came on so heavily, it made me essentially regroup, dig far deeper than perhaps I'd ever intended to dig, to understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. It also brought me to the real truth of the journey that I'm on, that it's not an anthropological journey. It's not a scientific journey. It's a journey of, and without being too airy-fairy, love and respect of one another as human beings. Because I was pushed right into the corner, it pushed me to create the second book, and the second book is created in conjunction with the foundation. And the foundation is, I've been given my life back, so that I feel, by these extraordinary experiences with these communities. I have to return it. It has to be reciprocal. It has to be circular. It has to be self-sustaining. So by creating the foundation, so we're a self-sustaining little company here in Amsterdam. 20% of everything we earn, we reinvest in all the communities that I've visited, or here in educational systems within the developed world by creating free digital online platforms. None of that would have ever happened if it hadn't been for the criticism.
Really?
None of that would ever, that work, that passion, and that's what it's actually all about. Returning now to many of these communities and being greeted like a long lost son because of what we're doing there is one of the most, it is the most rewarding experience you can have as a human being. If you want to talk about wealth and a feeling of being rich, when you can go back and return with an investment, and it's not a literal investment, a little sort of pot of money, but we, with NGOs on the ground, find ways for these communities to bring their heritage, bring their culture, bring their understanding, bring their knowledge, their way of living into the future to readdress a balance. It's one of the most wonderful things that there is. And that came all because of the criticism. If it hadn't been for the criticism, I would have perhaps, or maybe not, rested on my laurels and go, oh, thank you very much for complimenting me on a couple of nice pictures. But that brought me to where we've only just begun today with this foundation. So wow. Very important, extremely important criticism, yeah.
So I just want to interject here and say that we have viewers from all over the world, from Asia to the US to Europe. And please let us know if you have any questions. I know that you've visited some of the most amazing tribes in all over the world. And anyone who has any questions, just please come up with them. We've had a lot of comments, and I just want to say that amazing storyteller, amazing story, really love to hear about the tribes. So thank you for that. And Neil, I'll let you take over.
Well, I mean, I'm really interested. I mean, you've touched on the foundation, Jimmy. I mean, I'm really interested in having you talk for a few, a minute or two or three or whatever, just really about what the foundation is and what you're doing specifically, because it seems to be kind of the driving force in you right now. And I know there's a lot of amazing stuff coming out of that.
Well, it's sort of the project here in Amsterdam, as I described it, it's a bit of a triangle. I'm evolving into perhaps an artist, where the camera, amongst other mediums, are a variety of ways I'm using to communicate what I see and feel, but in an artistic way. Next to that, there's this archive, this lifelong archive of material. We're trying to create digital platforms to share with the world. And then the last corner of the triangle is the foundation. This need to reinvest. For example, it was a wonderful story. I just came back before lockdown from the Kazakh in northwestern Mongolia. It was my 4th visit there in the last 10 years. Yeah. Always in the depths of winter, always minus 30. It's heaven on earth because you're so cold, they have to hold you to keep you warm. And we've set up, we've invested there in a sort of a community center. And the reason is, when I first went there 10 years ago, there were only about 20 of these eagle hunters, all elderly men. It was a tradition that was dying. When I went back there 4 years ago, I walked into the community and they sort of big smile, they greeted me saying, hey, Jimmy. So they obviously hadn't forgotten me. And then they took me into a room, and there were a pile of the first book before which I hadn't sent, and a whole pile of other pictures on the wall, pictures which I hadn't made of them. So I suddenly started to put my hands over my face and went, oh no, what's happened is exactly what everybody warned me. You shouldn't interfere because it will change things. And I sort of got on my knees and said, I'm so sorry. They said, oh, you have changed everything. Your visit, your pictures, that book changed everything for us. And again, I thought, oh no, what are they going to say? But in the most beautiful way that you can imagine. And I said, my eyes lit up and said, what? You have no idea. There are now 400 of us. There are 400 eagle hunters. There are not only men involved, there are also women involved. And the following few days, they had a sort of festival essentially for me. 400 of them sort of performing these rituals across these mountains, everybody sort of fighting to have their picture made. But what the reason was, other people had visited, not many, because it's quite remote and quite difficult to get to, and said, we want to make a Jimmy picture, to put it simply. And in a way, they started to generate an income out of that. They started to realize perhaps there's a way of sustaining their traditions and their culture in a way of sort of delicate tourism. They started Ulaanbaatar, which has about 2/3 of the population in Mongolia, is one of the unfortunately most polluted cities on the planet, they started to return back to the west, to the Altai. And they said, because of these pictures, and also most importantly, this idea of pride, this idea of dignity, this idea of respect that you saw in us, we began to refeel in ourselves. So along these lines, and time again, we're doing a big project with the Maasai in Kenya. We're doing another big project with the Keros in Peru, another one in Papua New Guinea. This whole idea with this ritual with the kids that the birds of paradise are quite scarce to sustain the feathers so that they can use them for generations to come. So because of this continual returning, which is my way of justifying the fact that I will carry on traveling, perhaps not as manically as I have been doing for the last few years, is this idea of listening to what they need and enabling them to come into the future, but at the same time bringing their heritage and their understanding and their wisdom with them. But all
So one question I have.
All based on this idea of celebrating them, of seeing them in this very glorified celebratory light. Sorry, question.
Oh, go ahead. So one question I have is that because Keros is kind of my tribe, and rituals are incredibly important when it comes to all the indigenous tribes around the world. And I also think it's very important. I'm just about to have it with my 14-year-old child, or who's now becoming a man, and to have it not like a 1 year half old a ritual, but to really show that he's coming from youth to a man, what that means, and also for me to let him go in a different way. But it's something that we've lost in the Western society. Would you agree?
Completely, but it's. I don't want to judge anybody. I don't want to point any fingers. How the life I've evolved living and leading is I'm not exceptional, but due to exceptional circumstances, I went off at a tangent to try and come back. I wouldn't want to impose any of what I experienced in my early childhood on any other living human being. But in a way, when one receives pain, when one is challenged, when one goes to the darkest human places imaginable, it becomes a very, very, very interesting journey. One asks questions that one normally wouldn't ask. And then if one dares to lead a life as a very fallible, vulnerable human being, it can be one of the most rewarding experiences that there is. So that balance, I've had it for years with my kids, and they're now essentially left home, pushing them to the limit, but at the same time as protecting them. And this idea of this sort of mollycoddled world of digital interactivity, and I was referring earlier to Avatar. I really had Tintin as an avatar as a kid. And then the other day, my son, who's 20 and he's studying, and he was showing me, I found this amazing game online. It's called Horizon. I'd never heard about it. And I said, but sweetie, do you realize this is essentially in a human way, the life that I'm aspiring to lead? Why is that? Because it's a deep feeling of connection. It's a deep feeling of connection that brings me to one of the happiest places that exists. But how you bring this young generation into feeling that is wildly complicated. Yeah, but extremely.
You've had a lot of experience as well through your life, of course, and gone from dark to light to dark to light. Talk a little bit about that.
You're referring to me or to Neil?
Neil as well, so we get you into this.
I don't know about that, Anna. You know, I mean, the piece that really resonates, and we all have our stories, right? We all have our stories, but the piece that resonates with all that you've talked about, and certainly what we believe in as a group of people at Six Senses is this whole, you know, story around connection and reconnection and heart and soul, and I mean all the things that you talk about all the time, and certainly that touches me on a personal level, and many of us in the group, because we're kind of a group of like-minded people, and it is all about connections. I mean, that's what our lives are made up of, and that we all too often just don't cherish in the way we ought to cherish, you know, unconsciously or for whatever reason. And to have that mindfulness that that you have, and that, I mean, you are an obsessive personality in the best possible way, but to have that obsession around some of these things that just drive you every day is so kind of heartwarming in so many ways, and really touches me on a very personal level, given some of the things that perhaps Anna is referring to in my own life, you know.
Yeah. I was looking earlier, and I'd looked at some of your clips online, Neil, and you were talking at some conferences, and there's something I want to run that's parallel, and this whole idea that you're providing a wellness service. But that whole idea of a spa is a little bit of a decoy. It should be a little bit of the icing on a cake. And what you want to create is this layered experience, this experience that one has to earn, one has to feel, one has to touch, one has to love. And then the icing on the cake, the blanket, perhaps using another metaphor, the picture of that whole process is the spa experience. And trying to open up a whole world of connectivity and sensitivity that people don't necessarily know. So people will carry on traveling, so they should. That's the only way they will learn, the only way they will feel. But the present they give themselves at the end of the day is that spa experience. But prior to that, they have to invest in it. They have to earn it. So when they go on these journeys with you and your organization to these wonderful, extraordinarily wonderful locations in the world, the spa should be only the little island. It's the experience in and around with the communities that live there that is the real value. And how you build that into the process, I find that potentially very exciting and very fascinating and rewarding.
So I have a question from one of our audience that I just want to interject with. And this is, where would you most like to photograph next?
Me, where would I most like to photograph next? Oh, it's a big, broad question. I'm still trying to deal with looking at myself in a mirror. So if you want to use that as an analogy, whether I end up taking pictures of myself, I doubt it. But it's that whole idea of, it's not necessarily where I would like to photograph, but it's who I would like to meet or who I would like to sit on the floor and look up to. One of the most rewarding journeys I had in the last couple of years was going to the Marquese Islands in Polynesia. And there's a nice little story with that. They're remote, you know where they are? They're sort of, you've got sort of Tahiti, and then you've got Hawaii, and they're in the middle. So they're extremely remote. There are 12 islands. When I arrived there, I thought I've arrived in heaven on earth. And I sort of walked around, and they're not only extraordinarily beautiful volcanic peaks, the people are one of the most aesthetically powerful human beings you'll ever see. And there's this beautiful celebration of androgeninity throughout there. And I've always felt a little bit weird, to be honest. I'm a guy, I'm heterosexual, but I've had a sort of, I felt very female as well. And as a kid, that was obviously sort of beaten out of me. And I arrived on these islands, and I thought, this is it. They celebrate everybody. It doesn't matter who or what you are. You're put on a pedestal, and they say you're beautiful. And they wake up every morning as I try and greet the sun. They put flowers in their hair, and they walk around, strutting around these islands, saying, life is amazing. So I sort of immediately sort of went up and said, this is where I want to stay. This is where I want to spend the whole of my life photographing, connecting, to answer this lady or person's question. And they said, well, we don't really like your kind. I'm sort of making a complicated story short. I said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, we've had quite a few visitors over the years who feel exactly the same. And they arrive on these islands and, oh, this is amazing. You're beautiful. I want to stay here. And I said, well, help. And they said, well, do you know the painter Paul Gauguin, the French impressionist, the friend of Van Gogh? I said, yeah, well, he ended up here. And I said, oh, this is where he made those paintings. And he said, yeah. He came here, but we really don't have fond memories of him. You celebrate him in your world, but in our world, he spent most of the kids here on the island are descendants of his, so he had an ulterior motive. So please go away, please go away. So I said, but I'm not like that. And they said, well, okay. But they said, there was one man who came to these islands who we would welcome back again. He's now passed away. But if you were in any way capable of emulating what he did and gave to us, we would welcome you with open arms. And I sort of immediately said, well, who is it? And they said, his name is Jacques Brel. Jacques Brel, the sort of the Francophile Elvis.
Yeah.
and very good looking, very successful, wonderful singer. Listen to his music after this talk. It's amazing. It goes deep inside. And it turned out, I didn't know this story. It turned out he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And they said, Jacques, all the money, all the success, all the beauty, we can't solve it. This is the end of your journey. Give it plus or minus a year and a half. We can't do anything for you. So he left, and he said, rather than sitting down and crying, he said, well, I'm going to go off into the world and find the one place I want to stay at and eventually die. Traveled around the world, ended up on the Marquesa Islands. And same story, they said, well, we don't want you. And he said, well, I want to give you something. And they said, well, we need help. We're very, very volcanic. There are no beaches. It's very difficult to connect. And we find it we would like somebody to help us make a community. And he said, I've got an idea, and this is wonderful. I want to make a film about it one day. And he traveled back to France, bought himself a Gypsy Moth, a little sort of yellow biplane, much the same as an Out of Africa, flew back and built a landing strip on each of the islands and spent the last year of his life working as a postman. And from island to island with this terminal cancer, till the day that he died sitting in his aircraft, and they lifted him out, put him in a hole in the ground. The aircraft is still there today. There's a little mound in the ground with flowers on it. And they said, now, Jimmy, if you're half of what he was in this, what you want to give back to us on your return here, you'd be more than welcome to come. But I doubt you'll ever be able to emulate what he gave us. So to answer that person's question, if there's anywhere I'd like to go tomorrow and take my camera, it has nothing to do with the camera. It has to be to the Marquesa Islands.
Wow.
And that story touches me. And here you have somebody who had everything. He had it all. And rather than sort of wallowing in self-pity, he said, well, I'm going to give something back to the world. And so I use him as an example, although I'll never look half as beautiful as him or even be able to sing a fraction like him. He sort of stands high in my...
He was an extraordinary singer.
Oh, yeah, but that's felt it. But that's why.
Yeah.
Just with his voice, because listen to how he sang, and that's how he died. Yeah.
Anna, are there more questions?
Well, we're just about to round off, and I want to make sure that you ask your question, Neil.
I'm not sure if I don't think I have any more. I'm just happy to hang out here and chat with Jimmy and you,
Well, I think we have something wonderful to share. We were referring earlier to the fact that I disappeared as a teenager into the Himalayas, into the womb of the Buddhist culture. And I'm not a Buddhist. I read about it. I would love to, but I don't think it's actually possible the way I live in the developed world here. But it's a part of the world I keep returning to. And if I'm correct in saying, I will be traveling with some Six Senses guests in the early spring of 2021 to visit your new lodges, which is a wonderful request by you. And I'm extremely excited to be going on this journey. And again, it's a part of the world which, if the listeners are not aware of, it wasn't until 1974 that it opened up until tourism. And it had been watching all the other nations around it making all the mistakes. And as a result of that, it's a relatively speaking, pristine cultural, natural setting, like no else in the world, which through your new lodges gives visitors like us the opportunity to experience the spa, but at the same time, these wonderful layers around the spa of culture, nature and heritage. So that's, I think if I'm right, it's in March next year.
Yeah, well, we're excited about that. I mean, Bhutan, as you say, is just, it's a one-of-a-kind hotel or a one-of-a-kind country. And with our owners there, have built some extraordinary lodges that just really enhance in a little way just the amazing aspects of Bhutan as a place. But you've been there, right? You've been there, and yeah. So we're really excited to have you there, and again, I always remember when we met, and after the first couple of times, you've always said that we're like planting seeds together, and I really believe that. You meet people in your life, and it's a blink moment or whatever it is, but I'm not sure what it is, but I just know that we're going to do a lot of things together in the future, and that will evolve. The universe will make that happen, along with help.
I'm convinced of it, because when after TED in Rio,
Yeah.
sort of a part of the world where I spent a lot of my adult life in is Ibiza and Spain. And one of the reasons my first book was published was because I make every year a family group portrait of the owners of a restaurant called La Paloma. And to cut a long story short, we ended up reenacting that picture with your Six Senses family and your wonderful daughter, Talana. And that was a beautiful experience, a beautiful day. And that's what it's all about. It's connecting its rich moments in life and some of the most wonderful moments on the planet, but experiencing it by investing in the local community there in and around. And although Ibiza is not communities full of indigenous tribes, there are a variety of tribes there, inverted commas, also very interesting to connect to. And I mean that with enormous amount of love and respect. So we had a wonderful few days there, and I would like nothing more than to carry on building these days into our life in the future. How and where, I'm not sure, but I trust it.
We will do that.
Maybe one day we'll sit together in a little old gypsy moth, and you'll sit in front of me like Out of Africa with Robert Redford and Meryl Streep, and you'll put your hand back and yeah.
There you go. And I'll sing to you, Jacques. I'll sing you Jacques Brel songs, okay? There you go.
I look forward to that one. So no, I think, our Six Senses Ibiza that's opening next year, we hope to welcome you there as well. And I know that Talana, who's there, and Jonathan, our amazing owner, and Gonzalo, our general manager, are all waiting to open and welcome you there, because that's going to be, and I would have to agree with you that it might not have indigenous people, but it has some beautiful, spiritual, special people in Ibiza. It's a special energy, just like Bhutan is.
When I was first, I may look a bit weird and but I'm one of the straightest, in many ways, most boring people you will ever meet. I'm very, very sort of autistic and ordered. When my ex-wife, we're still sort of homies together, so don't get upset. We're actually very good friends, 10 times better now than when we were married. She took me there 26 years ago, and I was very, Ibiza, I'm seeing the world. I've just come back from Afghanistan. I don't need to sort of run around with a sort of a leopard skin bikini on. But 26 years till today, I'm still very much in love with it, because it has a very, very, very special spirit. And I think the property you're developing and building there will be absolutely wonderful. And the natural location up in the Northwest is very, very dear to my heart. So please, yes, I would love to come.
Well, you'll be there. Jimmy, it's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
It's always very flattering to be invited to have these conversations. I hope I didn't suffer from, I don't have jet lag these days, but perhaps a little bit of chat lag, but I apologize. It's just enthusiasm.
Wonderful. So much. And thank you both, our CEO, Neil Jacobs, as well as Jimmy Nelson, for this beautiful talk, this beautiful conversation, which I think, to summarize, it's about connection and reconnection. And you use photography for that, others use other things, but I think reconnection is how we come out from dark to lightness. And whatever we need to help us to reconnect, whatever is singing or photography, wellness, whatever it is, do it, because that's what makes a difference. So thank you both so much, and wish you a lovely day.
Well, one last thing. I think we're both, all three of us, are in a very, very privileged position to enable other phenomenal human beings to feel the richness that they don't normally get access to. And it's imperative that we carry on doing that. But
Well, thanks, Jimmy. We'll see you soon.
Hey, look
Take
after yourselves in Stockholm and in Singapore. And big kiss. Thanks.
All right. See you.
Waxholm Hotel here in Stockholm Archipelago for hosting us today. So thank you, Waxholm Hotel. Beautiful hotel. So thanks, everyone, and have an absolutely lovely day.
Thank you. Bye, Anna.